Fox News alert on a pair of growing scandals threatening to envelop the White House at this hour. Welcome to America Live, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. First, the IRS admits now that it inappropriately targeted conservative groups for additional scrutiny during the 2012 elections, but it happened long before that as well. We have since learned that its admissions don't come close to encapsulating what it actually did as well either, and we're going to get more for you in moments on that. But we begin with the Benghazi terror attack that killed 4 Americans, including our ambassador, on 9/11 of last year in Benghazi, Libya. Over the past few days, reports surfaced that the administration's talking points were changed over and over again. Steve Hayes broke it first in the Weekly Standard last Sunday. Then Jonathan Karl of ABC News doubled down and expanded the reports on Friday, and wow, have things changed since then. Now we know that the talking points originally offered by the CIA were watered down significantly to completely change them, to delete references to suspected ties between the assault and Islamic militants, al-Qaeda-related groups, to scrub the report of the CIA's notation that it had warned of unrest and other attacks in the area prior to the 9/11-12 attack. Critics have accused the Obama administration of being less than honest about this attack, in particular in the days and weeks right after it happened, because, as you may recall, President Obama was in a fight for his re-election at the time. Moments ago, President Obama addressed that criticism live. Listen here.
The whole issue of this, of talking points, frankly, throughout this process has been a sideshow. And the emails that you allude to were provided by us to congressional committees. They reviewed them several months ago, concluded that, in fact, there was nothing afoul in terms of the process that we had used. And suddenly, 3 days ago, this gets spun up as if there's something new to the story. There's no there. So the whole thing defies logic. And the fact that this keeps on getting churned out, frankly, has a lot to do with political motivations.
In moments, we will be joined by California Congressman Darrell Issa. He's chairman of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. He chaired that hearing we watched on Benghazi just last week, and I will ask him about the president's comments. But we begin with our chief Washington correspondent, James Rosen. James?
Megyn, good afternoon. President Obama's account of Benghazi and how and why the issue has flared up again to the point where it is once again consuming one of the most valuable commodities a president has, his time, standing alongside a foreign leader today, no less. Well, his account omitted last Wednesday's explosive House oversight hearing and the disclosure of the contents of the 12 versions of the Benghazi talking points that were prepared by his top aides. Those talking points delivered by UN Ambassador Susan Rice on the 16th of September, just 5 days after the attacks, of course, pressed a false narrative of the Benghazi attacks. But in President Obama's retelling, he early on branded Benghazi a terror event and dispatched to Capitol Hill on the 19th of September, 3 days after Rice's Sunday show tour, the nation's top counterterrorism official, Matt Olsen, to provide sworn testimony that Benghazi was a terror event.
We have been very clear about throughout was that immediately after this event happened, we were not clear who exactly had carried it out, how it had occurred, what the motivations were. It happened at the same time as we had seen attacks on U.S. embassies in Cairo as a consequence of this film. And nobody understood exactly what was taking place during the course of those first few days.
But none of the president's statements in the first weeks after the Benghazi attacks, nor in the talking points delivered by Ambassador Rice, matched the certainty that the CIA exhibited in the first draft of the talking points, wherein the agency said, quote, "We do know that Islamic extremists with ties to al-Qaeda participated in the attack," unquote. Indeed, White House Press Secretary Jay Carney within that first week indicated there was no such evidence.
Our initial information, and that includes all information, we saw no evidence to back up claims by others that this was a pre-planned or premeditated attack.
Also, we did hear the president discuss this morning the contents of his Presidential Daily Brief, or PDB. That could spark renewed calls for access to those, perhaps the most sensitive of classified executive branch documents. Megyn.
James, thank you. My next guest is demanding answers and wants to question under oath the 2 men who led the State Department's investigation of the Benghazi terror attack. He is California Congressman Darrell Issa. He's a Republican and chairman of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. Mr. Chairman, first let me ask you what you made of the president's remarks earlier this morning.
Well, only the president could tell us with a straight face that there's never been any confusion and that from the beginning they said the right thing. You obviously didn't know to be the truth, and he was doing that on behalf of the president. So the president can't have it both ways. He can't say that he's always been honest and then in fact have people such as Ambassador Stevens himself in real time as he's being attacked saying to his number two, Greg, we're under attack, or Gregory Hicks himself telling the operations center at State within minutes that it's a terrorist attack, and he knew from the get-go it was. So as you go through the facts as they were, yes, in real time we knew this was an al-Qaeda-backed terrorist attack, and everything else in between is simply revisionist history.
Because the president came out and said that no one understood what was happening in the first few days or when it was happening, and you're challenging that here. I want to ask you about that soundbite we played in setting up James Rosen's hit, where he says, we, the White House, were the ones who gave those emails that Steve Hayes got his hands on and that John Karl got his hands on to these congressional committees months ago. And he omits the pronoun, but he says, and determined that there was nothing afoul of the process we had used. And he says there's no there. He basically says you in Congress gave him a pass on these emails months ago.
Well, this is an interesting story, and it's sort of a use of careful words. First of all, it's not committees, as I understand it, it's committee. My committee didn't have those. It was delivered to the committee that has exclusive jurisdiction over sources and methods. In other words, covert activities, as though there were secrets in there. They were told they could look at it, but then the agreement was it wouldn't go anywhere else. So when they're looking at, quote, what did the CIA know and when did they know it, they were looking at it in one role where you and I look at this unclassified or should be unclassified information, and we realize that it's just plain a cover-up.
In that same statement, the president said, he said, number one, 5 to 6 days after Susan Rice, he said, by the way, her talking points pretty much match my presidential daily briefing. And keep in mind that 2 to 3 days after Susan Rice appeared, I sent up the head of our National Counterterrorism Center, Matt Olson, to Capitol Hill and specifically said it was an act of terrorism. No pronoun there again. He says, and specifically said it was an act of terrorism, but that is what Matt Olson said. So he says, how could I be covering up something when I sent Matt Olson up to Capitol Hill to testify that it was an act of terrorism? Your thoughts?
Well, first of all, the president sent a letter to the president of Libya where he didn't call it a terrorist attack, even when in real time the president of Libya was calling this a pre-planned September 11th terrorist attack. So I think when you look at official correspondence from the president through the acting ambassador to the president of Libya, which came out in our hearing and was testified to under oath, the words that are being used carefully, like you just said, act of terror. An act of terror is different than a terrorist attack. The truth is, this was a terrorist attack. This had al-Qaeda at it. This came over the wall very quickly, attacked and killed 2 people, and then later 2 more hours later. Ambassador Stevens in real time told his number 2, while he was being attacked, Greg, we're under attack. There were pre-planned attacks beforehand, including blowing out a piece of the wall at this diplomatic facility in Benghazi. That information was denied in real time to the American people. Here's the real point, though, and the one that our committee's trying to get to. There were 3 fundamental mistakes. They said they needed more security. They got less security. They began being attacked and were attacked for more than 7 hours, and we're to believe that no response could even be started that could have helped them 7 hours later. Quite frankly, you can take off from Washington, D.C. on a commercial flight and practically be in Benghazi by the end of 7 hours. You certainly can take off from areas of the Mediterranean and bring at least some support in less than 7 hours. And then lastly, the American people deserve real-time information, and other State Department assets deserve the same thing. Remember, there could have been a similar terrorist attack at another embassy or consulate, and they were not being prepared for what would have been a pre-planned al-Qaeda attack. A
couple more questions I want to get through to you. Hillary Clinton, of course, testified she knew nothing about the lack of security, the requests that have been made for security and have been denied by her underlings. Now, the former Vice President of the United States, Dick Cheney, has been pushing for you guys to subpoena her, because we find out now that the head of these two guys who ran the review of the State Department didn't think it was important to talk to the Secretary of State. So no one who is responsible for that review talked to her. You guys had her testify on Capitol Hill before, but my question to you is, does she get subpoenaed now? And what do you make of the fact that either she did know about the refusals of security, or, as she testified, she just had no idea about any of this? And what does that leave us to conclude about our former Secretary of State?
Well, I think we can certainly believe that she was disconnected, dispassionate. Even when she called at 2 in the morning on an obligatory call to the now acting ambassador in Libya, she never asked what he knew about the attack in her sort of performer call. So I think what you have is somebody who does the symbolism but doesn't do the substance, or maybe, just maybe, she knew. What we want to do is we want to get to who knew, when did they know, and who at the highest level is responsible for bad judgment. And I think that's where Undersecretary Kennedy and other key lieutenants, and these are not underlings, these are key lieutenants, that this so-called nonpartisan report didn't seem to have any blame above low-ranking. We need to find out if high-ranking people, whether career or political, should be held accountable, and that's what we're going to do.
Who
using
specifically? Kennedy, Mrs. Clinton again? Who else do you want to testify before you?
Well, right now we're going to be having interviews under oath with the two people that headed up the ARB. We're going to get through the questions about what did they find out, how did they reach their conclusions. We also are going to begin interviewing some of the same people that we have been denied up till now that the ARB interviewed. But before we do public hearings on anyone's request, we're going to do the private research, the good questions, the questions where somebody's given all the time they need to get the answer right, including bringing stacks of paper with them, because that's the right way to do an investigation. It's not about public shows. It's about preventing this from happening again.
Last question, need a quick answer. Should the president release his presidential daily brief from the time prior to and around the time of Benghazi?
I think when the American people are told lies, the documents leading to those lies become fair, and the president should release all information that his view and an opposing view as to what happened and how did we get misled.
Mr. Chairman, thanks for being here.
Thank you.